This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made this.
Welcome to the Japan on Film podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, and welcoming a new guest today, and that is Joey Weiser. Joey, how you doing today?
Hi, good. Nice to talk to you.
Yeah, good to talk to you too. Before we get too much started into today's topic, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name's Joey Weiser. I'm a cartoonist and illustrator living in Athens, Georgia. And I'm a big fan of Japanese film. For a few years, I had a Japanese film podcast called Toho Yaro with a couple friends of mine it was kind of similar to this, where we just pick a movie and watch it and discuss it. And these days, kind of my biggest output with Japanese film is that I'm involved with a local film club and help curate the kind of like Japanese selections when we watch stuff for that. So that's a lot of fun.
Oh, very cool. How did you get interested in Japanese movies in the first place?
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things that has a lot of little milestones along the way. So I'll try to not drag this on too much. But I was thinking about this, knowing I was coming on the show, and it really does go back to when I was a kid. And I think my first exposure to Japanese film was Godzilla movies. I was a big Godzilla fan and loved checking out tapes from the local video rental place and had a few tapes of my own. And, that was the 80s. So all that really existed at that point were the Showa films. So I really think I kind of like heavily imprinted on those like 60s and 70s ones in particular. And then kind of jumping ahead a few years into the 90s, I was in high school and I was really into anime and I was studying Japanese in high school, and eventually did a short, like a summer student exchange in Japan. And that time period is where I was seeing my first like Japanese films in Japanese, knowing that they were Japanese films. And that's when I was seeing a lot of the kind of standards of the 90s US rental market, like Tampopo and Shall We Dance and I don't know what else, like the Samurai trilogy and Seven Samurai and all that stuff. And I think for quite a while I would consider kind of an above average, but still kind of casual Japanese fan, a film fan. I'd see a lot of stuff when it would come my way, but I wasn't like necessarily specifically seeking it out. And I started to do more of a deep dive in like maybe around 2010-ish. And there were a few things that kind of came up with that where, first of all, I had Netflix, which was the DVD plan version of Netflix. And that had a surprisingly deep well of like stuff that you could pull from, like foreign film and stuff. And so that's when I first started seeing a lot of Yakuza films. That's where I first saw Battles Without Honor and Humanity. It's where I first saw the first few Tora-san films. And I think around this time period is also where I started really kind of getting deep into the world of like bootlegs and fan subs and things that where you could kind of find Japanese films that weren't widely available in English elsewhere. And it kind of opened up this whole world of like Japanese movies that I didn't even really know existed, because up until that point I'd seen mostly like samurai films and monster films and things like that. And seeing that there was like this, like, I don't know, an entire many, many decades worth of films available is really exciting. And, to this day, like the stuff that I tend to lean towards are still the 60s and 70s contemporary film or contemporary setting films. I like a samurai film and stuff, but I just really do seem to dig that stuff that's like set in modern day with in the 60s and 70s. And kind of reflecting on it, I've wondered if maybe that actually goes back to my history with the Godzilla films, and it's kind of created this like false nostalgia for a Japan of the 19s, 60s, and 70s. And that's what really like grabs me, you know, the music and fashion and even just the settings and all that stuff. So that's what I tend to watch most of, but I watch all sorts of stuff as the opportunity arises, you know.
No, I think there's something to that, because when I first started getting into Japanese films, beyond like the staples like anime or samurai stuff, the contemporary stuff that I was watching at the time was stuff that was set in like the 90s and early 2000s. And when I was thinking about it, one of my classes, like I'd given them a list of all the movies, and I was looking over the list, and I'm just like, there's a lot of movies from the 90s and 2000s in the early aughts in this list. So I think I think I tend to gravitate towards those when I'm, not looking for the more outlandish type of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The 90s and 2000s, kind of early 2000s, tend to be kind of more of the 90s especially are a big blind spot for me. I don't quite know as much about that stuff. And then I'll see like new things as they come out. 2020 and 2021 were really good years for like online film festivals, where these like film festivals of Japanese films that used to be only in person because of the pandemic, they would stream them online. And so I got to see a lot more contemporary film that way, which was really exciting. But I don't know what it is. It's that my heart is in the Showa era for whatever reason.
Well, yeah, I think that goes back to what you first got interested in at the time. So that definitely makes sense to me. And yeah, when you were talking about back when Netflix did the rental DVDs, I've got some nostalgia for that period too, because I did see a lot of stuff back in those days, and it kind of makes me miss that, because we don't. I mean, streaming is great to have at your fingertips, but there's so many more levels of license rights and everything that goes into it. Yeah. So the selection's not as broad, I feel, as it used to be when it was when they still had the DVD program.
It's true, because stuff like DVDs could be long out of print, but they'd still have them in their library, and so you could grab stuff that you wouldn't be able to find otherwise. It was a good resource while it lasted.
Also, like and that bootleg market, right? The fan subs. I remember, back in the day, looking on eBay for like, Japanese movies and DVDs and getting like Region 3 imports or something like that, where it had, some subs of questionable quality, but, and even the quality of the film wasn't all that great. And it looked like somebody had, just stamped like a printer label on the disc instead. But it was a way to access those movies, and that it feel, with all the streaming possibilities now and all the different options we have, it ironically feels that we've gotten less access to Japanese movies in Western countries than we had before.
Yeah, we're in a pretty good like moment for like boutique English language publishers putting out like gangster films and stuff that maybe weren't so available, but it still tends to be really focused on like genre films and stuff that has kind of like shock value and stuff like that. Yeah. And I'm grateful I've gotten some very beautiful Blu-rays in the last few years of movies that I never thought would get like a commercial release in the US, and it's really awesome. But there's just so many possible stuff that it's a whole nation's worth of movies over decades and decades. So of course there's a wide variety of things available.
Absolutely, yeah. I want to hear a little bit about the podcast you did. How did that get started up, and what was some of the stuff you'd focused on with that show?
Sure, yeah. So the podcast was called Toho Yaro, like Toho the film company, and then Yaro like the Japanese word for like guys or whatever. Kind of a play on Truck Yaro, which are those trucker movies from the 70s. That came about because I had two friends who I knew from different circles who both were interested in Japanese movies, and they both came to me independently. One of them was Alex Kazanis, who is a host of the One Piece podcast, all about the popular anime and manga series, which I'm also a fan of. And then V, she just goes by V now, V Dryman. And she approached me too. She is somebody I worked with and said like, it would be really cool if we could like do something where we could like talk about movies and and it would be a good way for all of us to like force ourselves to watch stuff we wouldn't normally watch, because all three of us have like slightly different taste. And so it really ran the gamut of like comedies, sci-fi, horror, action, like anything, you wanted. Like we just sort of rotate who chooses the movie, and then we'd watch it and kind of do book report style, somebody talking about the plot and discussing what we thought of it. And it's fun. I think that I encourage folks to start kind of in the episode 30 or so. Like the Message from Space episode is where we first started really condensing the format. I think we were a little bit too exhaustive with like the plot summaries at first, and after that 30 or 32, whatever that is, episode mark, we started being a bit more breezy with the plot summary and just really focusing on like what we thought about the movie. And I think those go pretty well, and those are still all available for folks to check out if they want to. And my advice is always just kind of like start with a movie that you've already seen or one that you're particularly interested in, and see if you click with it, and then you can start digging around through the rest of the archives.
Yeah. So how long did you go for, and why did you guys stop?
I think we went for maybe about 3 years, like 60 episodes or so. We were monthly for a while, and then we, during the pandemic, had more time, and we started doing 3 or 4 episodes a month. And we just stopped because we all got busy with other stuff. It was really hard to like wrangle all three of our schedules. And it's kind of a bummer, but I'd still, I think I've kind of replaced it with that film club in Athens that I was talking about, because that gives me at least my outlet to like bring something to folks and be like, hey, check this movie out. I think it's pretty cool. And I'm always looking for recommendations and stuff too, but I do kind of miss that aspect of having kind of a homework assignment to some extent.
Right.
Being oh, I wouldn't necessarily watch this movie if given, the choice, but my friend Alex said that it's really good, so I'll watch it,
Yeah, I'm looking at I just brought it up on my phone now, and I'm looking at the movies you covered. We definitely have some crossover with this show. I see with some of the episodes we've done, and some stuff that I have on my list actually to cover is also stuff you guys have done as well.
Oh yeah,
and yeah, I'm kind of sad that it's gone, because one of the reasons I brought this show back after ending it a few seasons ago was because there's just not a lot of discussion going on about Japanese films, at least not non-anime type stuff. So I was I keep looking and checking to see if there's any other people in this podcasting space, and it really feels like I'm the only one sometimes these days.
Yeah, I feel like we had a decent amount of kind of audience crossing over from that One Piece podcast to build in like enough people and people that know me from my cartooning and stuff that were people like checking it out. But I don't know how many folks like necessarily stuck with it all the way through, because we would cover stuff regardless of if they were super available or how interested we thought people would be into it. And so I think it's kind of hard to keep people's attention when you're talking about such a niche subject and something that they're maybe just kind of only partially interested in. But we had a good amount of like, devoted fans who would comment on the episodes and were asking about where we were when we stopped putting out episodes and stuff. So I remember when I found your podcast, maybe last year sometime, I was listening through the archives, and I have heard you say, like, I wish there were more podcasts about Japanese film. And that's the way I felt too. And I looked, and we had a little bit of crossover where we were making episodes and you were making episodes at the same time. But for whatever reason, our paths didn't cross. I think on one hand, we picked a name that we thought was funny, but is actually kind of a little tough to like sell people on if they don't know what it means, and caused a lot of confusion. A lot of people associate Toho with Godzilla, actually, specifically. And so we got a lot of people asking about like, well, why are you talking about these movies? These are Toei movies or whatever, And yeah, so there were some stumbling blocks along the way with that show, but I'm overall proud of it. And I'm glad that folks can still listen to it if they look it up.
Yeah, I think part of the reason too is just sometimes these podcast search engines aren't the best, because I remember
Mhm.
searching for Japanese film and like my podcast was the only one that I never saw yours come up at all in any of the search results.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's it's a definite issue too with the podcast search abilities. But yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to check some of these out. But before we jump into the movie, you also mentioned that you're a cartoonist. Why don't you talk a little bit about your cartooning?
Sure. I draw kind of adventure fantasy comics for the publisher puts it at middle grade, which is kind of grades 3 through 5. But I have readers that are older and younger than that. And I did a 5 book series called Merman. That's about a little fish boy. And my most recent books are Ghost Hog and Dragon Racer. And there's a little bit of Japanese film influence in them for sure. But if you like kind of like cartoony characters and creatures and bright, colorful worlds and stuff, that's the kind of work that I do. My kind of philosophy with making work is that if I'm having fun making it, hopefully it will also then be fun to read. And so I just kind of come up with ideas that seem fun to draw or seem engaging, and then build off of that and craft the story kind of around that. Um, and yeah, I'm working on a book now that's unannounced, but I'll say that it does have its roots in like kaiju and monster battles and stuff. So hopefully folks will dig that too.
So can you say when that book is coming out?
Well, I'm still drawing it. Yeah, it got delayed just because of my schedule's crazy, but we're looking at 2025,
Okay.
probably spring or late winter 2025.
Okay, because
For
by
the
the time
published.
people listen to this, it'll be probably January 2024. So if it was coming out
Yeah.
soon, I wanted to tell people to go check out your website or something
Nah,
to find
yeah,
out
it'll
more
be a
information.
while.
But
But if
yeah,
yeah, if folks like follow, like I'm on Instagram, Joey Weiser Comics, or Joey Weiser on Twitter and Blue Sky. You can see I'm on Twitter. I'm kind of just talking about whatever cartoons I'm watching and stuff. But like I will, when it's time to start mentioning the new book, I'll be talking about that all the time.
okay,
Yeah.
awesome. And this film club you've got in Georgia, in Athens, Athens, Georgia, you said, right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. How did that get started, and what kind of stuff have you guys been watching with that? Or if is it, and if people are in the area, is it open to new members too?
Yeah, if you are in the Athens, Georgia area, maybe the Atlanta area, I would look up the Athens Flicker Film Society on Facebook, or Pachinko Pop on Instagram, where you can see stuff about what we're showing. It's just a private, club, but anybody's welcome to come. We just want to be clear that this isn't something where we're making money off of it and stuff, because a lot of times people are just bringing in their personal copies of movies to watch and stuff like that. This isn't filling an actual theater with people. But yeah, I kind of focus on cult and genre film because I know that that's like more fun to watch with a crowd than an Ozu drama or something like that. But yeah, recent, like this month we're going to be watching a Zatoichi movie. And what have we watched besides that recently? Here, I've got a list here. The Space Adventure Cobra movie, which is a really fun anime movie. Here's one: A Savage Beast Goes Mad, which is a like bus hijacking car chase movie from the 70s that's really wild. And that's one that's maybe a little bit harder to find, not available for purchase in the US and stuff. And I think that was one that folks really liked because it's just basically an hour of car chases and mayhem, which is very fun. So yeah, we a variety of stuff, but it tends to be kind of action packed stuff that's kind of maybe trying to leave people going like, what did I just see? Because it's fun to watch with a group of people and have some drinks and whatever.
Oh, absolutely. Those are some of my funnest memories of college, was just watching these movies with friends, and like just some of the insane J horror stuff that we used to watch, the Grindhouse stuff back in the day.
Uh-huh.
That's one of the biggest disappointments too with a lot of these Japanese movies, and I've run into this problem too with my show. Is there's a lot of stuff to cover, but you're also not sure how available this stuff is. I used to run links off the webpage where people could buy the DVDs, and a lot of them are out of print now when I go to click on the Amazon links. So it's tough out there.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I hope that one of my long-term goals for this show is that maybe streamers or distributors will start reissuing some of these movies.
Yeah, that was an issue that we were running into a lot with our podcast too, because we were just picking movies that we wanted to talk about, and then some of them were basically, I mean, close to impossible for other folks to see.
Yeah.
And it was the kind of thing where it's like, well, are we how hard are we really going to promote, the quote unquote gray market stuff, and or ask people to try to track down a long out of print DVD on eBay or something like that. And that became something that was kind of weighing on me a bit more. And if I had to do it again, I think I'd try to pick more stuff that are easy for folks to see, just because I think it's a bit more engaging for the audience. But I like talking about stuff that's hard to find because that's exciting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's part of the reason why I switched the format of the show to the way I did, where bringing on guests and having them pick the movies. So it makes it, if you guys can get the movie, then there's a better chance that people in the audience can get access to it as well.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Because here I'm in a privileged position since I'm in Japan, so I have all these movies at my fingertips. Often not subbed, so all I have to do is get subtitles for them. But that's a minor annoyance at best. But everybody else, they'll like, oh, this movie sounds so great, but it's like $90 on Amazon because it's been out of print for 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah, and some of that stuff eventually gets rescued by these like boutique publishers, like I was saying, but it's hard to count on that.
Yeah. But anyway, I think that's a nice preamble to get into today's movie, which is A Colt is My Passport, Colt wa Ore no Passporto in Japanese. 1967 Yakuza film. This was now I'd never seen this movie until last night, actually, but I have had it for like over 10 years. One of my trips back in the States, I was in I think it was a Barnes and Noble, and they had these two box set collections. One was by Criterion. One was the film, like 4 films by Nagisa Oshima, and the other one was this Nikkatsu noir set, which had and it also included I Am Waiting, Rusty Knife, Take Aim at the Policeman, and Cruel Gun Story. And they were both like on sale. I think it was like $10 or $15 for each set was priced at. So I just picked them up and decided to, but they've been sitting on my Plex drive ever since, and I just have not had the opportunity to watch them yet. So I'm glad I finally got to see at least one of them so far. But what is your history with this movie?
It's kind of similar, to be honest. It's a movie I've been aware of for a long time. The title just grabs you, but I just hadn't gotten around to watching it until maybe 2 years ago. The Criterion Channel was having a Japanese noir like program because they kind of cycle through movies on that streaming channel. And I was like, okay, number one priority, I gotta see this Colt is My Passport movie, because I've been just so curious about it forever, because like I said, it's I think one of the best film titles ever. It's very like evocative and sort of nonsensical in a way that kind of reflects the film, but also like I'm a big fan of Joe Shishido, and so I wanted to see what this movie was all about. So I watched it a couple years ago via the Criterion Channel. Might still be up there if folks want to look for it. And I enjoyed it quite a bit.
And I think some of the the Criterion stuff, at least last time I saw, was also on Max too. One point they're also on Hulu too, so you might want to check both of those if you're in the States. So both those are possible. So I like Joe Shishido a lot too. I generally like Yakuza movies, but there was some definite good things about this movie I liked. But overall, I felt it was a little bit slower than I would have liked. I felt like some of the characterization, some of that pacing could have been picked up with more characterization, particularly on Mina's part, I felt. But
That's interesting because I feel like Mina is the one with the most characterization.
I think she is, but I feel like it's still not quite enough to really kind of sell the way she behaves in this movie. Like the way she so quickly attaches herself to Kamimura is just kind of I get what they're trying to do, right? There's this parallel between him and her former lover, but it didn't they didn't quite sell me on her attraction to him and how willing she is to go to these lengths to help him. I felt like there wasn't quite enough there to really kind of sell me on that aspect of it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I really attached to her the aspect of her story that is just kind of being stuck in this place and that she has to get out of there.
Mhm.
And you see how terribly she's treated, and you see that she kind of has this like history that they do just kind of give you light sprinkles of rather than really going in depth about. But it's enough to kind of sell you on, I think it sold me at least personally on what is kind of behind her actions, somewhat, at least as far as like needing to like escape that place, but being kind of too scared to go. And it is true that it's kind of seems out of nowhere that she decides to take these two guys in and put them up in her own room and stuff like that. But I do kind of sense that there's like just a kind of desperation in her life in general to like see what she can do to like get out of the situation that she's in.
Yeah, there is that aspect of it too. I do think Joe Shishido is great in this role. I thought he did a very good job. He plays this, kind of stoic character. He's got this very, which is very common among a lot of these Yakuza movies back at the time, where there's this kind of code of honor where they're willing to kill each other, but they've got this loyalty to each other. They've got this sense of honor, because there's definitely that sense was if he wanted to, he could just, run off himself at once he gets his buddy on the boat at the end. But he honors his word, and he leaves the boat, and he faces down with the Yakuza. And it's that kind of the basic stock Yakuza plot where you've got this honorable Yakuza going up against the other Yakuza who are betraying him. Very common trope you'll see in a lot of these movies.
Yeah, he like he carries out a job, but he does it maybe not to the way that they would have liked him to do it. And so now he's kind of both on the hit list for the gang that he killed their boss, but also kind of on the hit list for the gang that he was working for, putting him in a pretty bad spot. I think that I like Shishido best when he has a little bit of cockiness. He's pretty cold in this one, but he has a little bit of that cockiness and attitude to his character, which I think works really well. And I do like that he's like not willing to leave his buddy behind, because also his partner, he could probably have escaped on his, like Shishido could have escaped on his own a few times if he hadn't felt responsible for his friend. And so yeah, that it's definitely kind of honor driving this movie for sure.
Yeah. I'm glancing through some of the reviews on Letterboxd, which you've got two ones actually on of this one. But another thing that's one comment that someone said is I'm a little in love with Joe Shishido, my chipmunk man. And I was thinking the same thing, because he's got this it's so funny watching him play these parts, because his face doesn't necessarily seem like a hardcore Yakuza face, because he's got like this kind of baby face, chubby chipmunk like thing, like look going on.
Oh yeah, and those are implants. Like, do you know the story?
No, I did not know that.
Oh, so he had acted in and was getting just kind of bit roles and wasn't getting leading man parts, and so he decided he needed to do something to stand out, and actually got face surgery to give him these big pronounced cheeks, which I think is insane, because he looks like a chipmunk guy. He doesn't look like what I think as a cool looking guy, but for whatever reason, it struck, and it gave him the opportunity to like show off. And I think it is his like natural charisma that shines through, that really carries him through, and made him a success. Not just these like crazy chipmunk cheeks, but I guess it got him the attention it needed to get his foot in the door.
It's funny. I was started to watch this, and my wife was in the room with me when I started to watch it, and she remarked, she's like, "Oh, Joe Shishido, he's like, Marlon Brando in Japan." And I'm like, I wonder if I was thinking about, now that you mentioned that, I wonder if in part he did that to make himself look more like Marlon Brando in The Godfather. Although I don't think the timeline works out for that.
It was way earlier,
yeah.
But it's that kind of it's interesting. I wonder sometimes if after his surgery, if he kind of looked at himself and was like, yes, this is exactly what I wanted. Or if he was like, well, I guess we're working with this.
Other thing that also interested me was the actor who plays Shun, his partner, is Jerry Fujio. So I was curious about the name. So I looked him up, and it turns out he is of British and Japanese descent and born in Shanghai under Japanese occupation. So I just thought that was an interesting little thing, because I was looking at his name and I'm looking at his features, and I'm like, he doesn't look completely Japanese. So then when I looked it up, it looked a lot more interesting. But I think,
did you happen to see if he had like a separate singing career? I was kind of wondering about that.
Yeah, it mentioned that he had been a singer. In fact, that seems to be what he was mostly known for, was his singing career.
That makes sense. I don't recognize him from other movies. I'm curious to see if he has other roles, but he has that kind of featured song in the middle that I love. I love that kind of stuff. I love when movies kind of get really artificial, in the right movies. But like, so stuff like that is what really gets me kind of excited. And when I'm like, oh, I was not expecting, a fully produced song number in the middle of my hard-boiled noir film, but I love that kind of thing.
Well, some things people might recognize him from. He was in Yojimbo, and he was also in Dodeskuden, another that was Kurosawa's first color movie, I believe.
Oh, nice. I thought he was really good in this. He's not the cool guy type, but he's a really good kind of like lackey who you felt for, and we're really kind of pulling for to get away in the end. I was really worried when he was making his way up those ship steps that he was going to get shot in the back or something. But
well, also when they come back to the hotel room and they find the blood on the pillow, at first I'm just like, oh crap, did they kill him or something? But So I totally expected him to become like a kind of a sacrificial character to kind of drive Kamimura in the movie. But another thing I thought was interesting, I like what you mentioned about the theme of being stuck, and that kind of jumped out at me as well, because there is kind of that similar feel that Kamimura is in as well, where he's also kind of stuck in this situation where this, where there's not really any escape from this life, other than completely divorcing himself from society, and also with Mina too, the fact that she grew up on these barges. And she was looked down on by this idea that society looks down on the ones that live on the water, is what they said. This notion of there being this kind of like separate society from Japanese society based on these barges was so much so that even the Yakuza are kind of iffy about going onto their territory, where they're just kind of like, hey, we don't go there. All right. We don't mess around with those people. I thought, and even when the Yakuza guy, and when the Yakuza guy comes there, and they're like, what are you doing here? And he's just like, look, I'm unarmed. I just want to talk to that guy, and then I'm leaving, right? He even seems kind of scared of them.
Yeah, as soon as he gets out of his car, you just see men from off screen kind of starting to come in and descend on him. Not even in a really like particularly threatening way, just kind of walking up to him casually, but he knows that he's not in his territory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought that was so interesting to me, and it maybe that's actually something that I was more invested in and something I wanted to know more about, as opposed to the main story about this Yakuza guy getting betrayed by his gang.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find that the appeal of this movie to me is a lot in this just sort of like some of the surface level stuff, like the aesthetics of it, the vibe of it, the kind of mishmash of Western and noir with the music.
Yeah.
I find really appealing. So yeah, it is kind of a boilerplate story, but it's something that they can hang a lot of style on that I think works
Yeah.
really well.
Oh yeah, the film looks and sounds great. I think those are two of the biggest strengths it has. Like, I was shocked by how good this film looked several times I was watching it because um I mean, I don't believe this was a very high budget picture. It's it's just a Nikkatsu. Nikkatsu wasn't like this massive studio. I don't think I think they mostly did these kind of like small movies. So it it's not long. It's only 84 minutes, but it looks great. Like, and part of this could be the Criterion transfer that I watched, but even, I've got other Criterion DVDs of older Japanese movies, and like, I mean, I've got a version of Ikiru that was from the Criterion collection, and it doesn't look anywhere near as good as this one does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was beautiful. And I looked up the director, Takashi Nomura, and he's got 22 films, but I haven't seen any of them besides this one. So I don't really know. It does look like it's a lot of Nikkatsu. I see a lot of Akira Kobayashi and Joe Shishido in his he has a movie called Quick Draw Joe that has Joe Shishido wearing a cowboy hat and brandishing a rifle in his hands. It looks really good. But yeah, this isn't someone that is like a super renowned filmmaker, to my knowledge, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking over his filmography now too. I do not recognize any of these titles, so I'm completely unfamiliar with his other stuff. And in fact, it looks like, according to Wikipedia, this is the one he's most well known for, is this movie.
Yeah, for sure.
But also, one of the interesting things is he was influenced very much by French New Wave, and also, obviously, which makes sense, the music was the spaghetti westerns by Sergio Leone.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of people compared the opening shots in this movie to manga art and saying like it's very he's like it seems like he's borrowing from manga with those opening shots.
Oh, that's an interesting comparison. I hadn't thought of that. I mean, obviously the Western I had, but the comparing it to manga is interesting. This is that same sort of like eye for dynamics that he or his cinematographer had. Yeah, I the Western thing is really interesting because there is this showdown at the end, but it's still not like two men, at sundown coming towards each other or anything. It's like him versus a car, basically.
Yeah.
And a small army of guys. And I find the sort of bookends of this movie really interesting because they're like purely procedural. They're very like kind of just showing exactly how he does the hit at the beginning, and then at the end is this kind of showing how he does defends himself and wipes out the rest of his enemies, essentially. Which comes really after the like emotional high for me. Like after his buddy and the lady from the inn leave, I'm kind of like not emotionally invested so much anymore. Like that was the like, okay, they're free. They've had the emotional moment. Shishido has sacrificed himself. That's a big kind of emotional high. And then I do like feel a little bit of and now I guess the movie continues at that point. But it draws me in enough because there's kind of this mystery to like what he's setting up. You're like, okay, he's making an appointment to meet them in this abandoned lot, and he's like building a time bomb, and he's digging what looks like a shallow grave, and all these kind of mysteries do like keep me invested to find out at the end. And then it's sort of like such a glorious payoff with him like blowing up the car while the music's going totally wild that by the end of it I'm kind of cheering again.
Yeah, I thought that ending sequence was great, and with all the the comparisons to Nora, obviously, and the spaghetti westerns, but also like that whole ending, the lead up to that ending sequence, it's very much almost, and also the opening sequence too, when they're plotting out the kill. It made me think a lot about like 60s era spy films too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Japan had a big kind of spike in love for spy movies and kind of assassin stuff during this time period that I'm sure was like coming from Bond and all that stuff.
Oh yeah, I mean, especially the Roger Moore stuff was huge over here. Like, And obviously they'd filmed You Only Live Twice was filmed in not that far from where I live, actually, in Kagoshima. So they parts of it were, yeah. Like the volcano lair they'd used, I believe it was Shinmoe-dake, which is not that far from where I live. Although I have not been there, but they do have a plaque for You Only Live Twice there, marking the location.
Oh, that would be cool to see. Yeah.
Yeah, it's something I've been meaning to get to at some point. But yeah, the things that interested me the most was really that idea of the people on the barge, and I really wanted to know more about that and those comparisons, and also like what exactly was Mina's life when she was growing up on these barges. Like, how did she end up there, and how did she? I found myself really curious about the backstory, and a lot more curious about her backstory than the main story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really like drops you into this kind of like world that you do get the sense has been existing, where like Mina's working at that inn, and it's an interesting location, this kind of Western style inn, and then that scene where she comes in with Joe Shishido to the boat, and the guys are like gambling, and they're immediately just kind of like, they at first think that he wants to get in on their gambling, and they negotiate him coming on the boat with them and stuff. It really like does feel like this full world that we're only getting a small glimpse of.
Yeah. But it parallels that whole Western feel of it too, because it's like this, it's like the closest thing Japan in the 60s would have had to a frontier is being out on the ocean on these barges.
That's true.
But also this idea of them being kind of like these outcasts from society and looked down. I mean, that was very true back in the Old West. Like a lot of, we look at it from the movies, and a lot of people think it's, it's all white people, but a lot of it was, people trying to get away from the cities, trying to run away from society, and forming these communities on the outskirts. Also, like lots of runaway slaves and things like that, and those types of people out in the frontier land that does not get touched upon nearly enough in a lot of movies.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, you really get the sense that like once someone's out on the water, they're like lost to the world. Like they first try to escape via the airport, and it doesn't work out for them. And then there's kind of multiple plans to get on boats and get out there, and you just get the sense like, if we can just get out on the water, we'll be safe.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you also get that idea of it being another world, because Kamimura tells the captain, he's like, "We've got passports," and the captain's like, he's like, "Who cares if you have passports?
Yeah, right.
Doesn't matter. You just get on the boat. You're fine."
Yeah, exactly. We'll dump you at some dock, and then you can figure it out.
Yeah. But yeah, the motel was also kind of interesting. The Nagisa-kan, where it's this like truck stop place, but it's also, I found it funny that the old woman who works there, she's like, "We don't want killers here," and all this. I'm just like, lady, I'm sure you've had a lot of these people come through up until now. I think the only thing you're really worried about is the attention they're bringing.
Yeah, she seemed to kind of like understand why they were there when they first showed up. She just kind of throws them a room key, so she's been through this before. But I guess once it starts actually bringing the guys around to like cause actual like trouble for her in front of her face, then that is when it's too far. And even Mina mentions like somebody got shot through the window.
Right. Yeah. Stay away from the window. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this might just be me reading too much into things, but is this just me, or did I catch a little bit of homoerotic subtext between Shun and Kamimura, especially when they go into the hotel room? And, she says, she talks about, one room and all that kind of stuff, and just like kind of the look she's given them. It felt almost as if there was, and just like how close the relationship was. Also later, Mina makes the point of saying that she envies the male friendship and all that kind of thing, which those things jumped out to me, because men are not really known for having strong interpersonal bonds, right? It's much
but
more.
They do in Yakuza movies.
They do in Yakuza movies, right? Yeah, except in like these, in like these very tense situations, like these, like Yakuza or like, you know, soldiers or something like that. But other than that, you don't really see, there's not really that male bonding aspect is a really
Mm-hmm.
strong thing that happens in reality, I guess. And so it made me think that there was
Yeah.
some sort of homoerotic subtext going on there, and especially that is very common in Yakuza movies. I mean, Gozu is very open about that one in that movie. If you ever seen that
Yeah.
one, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just reading too much into it, but that was something that line stuck in my mind, and also when they checked into the hotel, especially the fact they're coming the back entrance too. That also kind of
Yeah.
made me. All of that kind of seemed to suggest like there's this idea of this kind of deviant male, you know, deviant in air quotes, male relationship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Yeah, I had not thought of it that way. I did. I read that line where she said that she envies their friendship and their ability as kind of a kind of comment again on her kind of position in the world as a woman,
Mm-hmm.
where she's just kind of stuck and she doesn't have as many opportunities and freedoms because she just is kind of expected to shack up with a guy and then do what he wants to do. And
Right.
it did make me kind of wonder, like, well, what is she commenting on not being able to have any kind of female friendships? Because she is kind of living in this world of men who are just like
Right.
constantly ogling her and mistreating her. But yeah, that's it. Definitely, their friendship is an example of that sort of like heightened reality where it's
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, a bond between partners is close to like family, friendship, and maybe romantic
Yeah.
entanglement as you can have in this kind of like fantasy version of a Yakuza world.
Well, because
You know?
because Kamimura he seems very affectionate towards Shun and very,
Mm.
you know, protective of him in a lot of ways, and like the whole notion of the fact that, you know, he knocks the guy, he drugs him, and then he's like I got to write him a note before we leave, so if he wakes up he's not scared or anything like that. I'm just like that again, that jumps out at me, and I'm like, okay, that doesn't seem like what you'd expect from like this, you know, hard boiled Yakuza assassin.
Yeah, it's almost like someone taking care of a child or something.
It
where
is,
it's
yeah.
like-
That too, yeah. That's another way it could be read too. Is
Yeah.
especially the fact that there's the whole, you know, Aniki idea, the idea of this kind of like, you know, the senpai kohai thing, which is very strong in a lot of these Yakuza movies.
Mm-hmm. For
Um,
sure.
and also the fact that when he lets it kind of, I'm not sure. Did you ever see the Japanese Unforgiven?
No, I have not.
Okay, so it's really good. I think I actually prefer it to the Clint Eastwood one, but one of the things that
wow.
strikes me about it is how they change the ending of it, the original story. Because in the original one, you know, the young kid, he goes off like in the middle of the movie, like very early on. We never see the woman who gets cut really after her heart to heart with Clint Eastwood. She's like, you know, becomes like a non-person after that in the movie. But those two characters, they end up playing a bigger part in the end of the movie. And in fact, the Clint Eastwood character, who's played by Ken Watanabe, he doesn't go back to his family at the end like he does in like the Clint Eastwood character does. Instead, he goes off on his own, but he tells the woman and the young guy to go and look after his children. He kind of gives them a chance at a new life. And I felt like a very similar idea happening here, where Kamimura is giving Shun and Mina this second chance at a new life, while he stays and deals with the consequences of what his life has wrought.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah. Yeah, you know, I don't know if I like completely read any romantic subtext between any of the three characters. But yeah, it is interesting if you think of it that way, and then you think like, well, are these two going to get together? But I think they're probably just going to travel and then find out where they go, and they'll either go their separate ways or figure it out together, which would be interesting.
Yeah, but by that I don't mean that he was giving them a chance to be together, but just more that he was giving them he was sacrificing himself so that they could have a chance at a better life. Whether that's together or separate would be up to them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, and it's it's a self-sacrifice, but then as we see, he
Hmm.
manages to get off. I mean, he's got some bullet holes in him, and has to figure out where to go from here, I guess. But at least he's not actively being hunted
Right. Yeah.
after the end of the film.
Um. Yeah, and that's another thing. Like, it does make you wonder what's. I mean, the fact that he is limping away at the end after that, it doesn't suggest that he's gonna have a happy ending after all this. Like, that's.
No.
Um. I think the movie does that intentionally. There is this idea that kind of like his life, he's living on borrowed time right now. Like, he managed to stop them, but you know there are now two gangs that he's got pissed off at him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I see people like comment on Yakuza movies and throw around like nihilism as
Hmm.
a kind of buzzword a lot of times, but it is true that there's this kind of like moment in a lot of these movies where someone has to just kind of throw everything away and just survive
Hmm.
or not survive at whatever their decision kind of ends up being. And sometimes it has to be almost kind of like short-sighted, like he's gotten away now, but he probably doesn't have much of a future after this either.
Right. Well, I think, and again, this goes back to Unforgiven. There's kind of this point of, you know, how much how much time has to pass, or how much time within what period of time can you have that second chance, right? Is there a point where
Hmm.
it becomes too late for you to have a second chance? Which, in a way, it kind of feels like this movie is kind of saying, because Mina and Shun, they're younger, they still have that opportunity, whereas Kamimura, whether or not he's actually older than them, at least in temperament and personality and emotionally, he seems older than them.
It's true, and yet like this is also kind of like brought about from his arrogance.
Hmm.
If he had, the gangs are like, why did you kill your target in front of our boss, and now our boss is like kind of being targeted.
Hmm.
And he's just like, well, you didn't tell me I didn't have to do that, which is like a cool guy comeback in the moment, but then there's these like dire consequences that he's basically ruined his life at this point because he
Well, also
didn't
too, when they get to the airport as well, right? They call him on the
hmm.
radio and they tell him, it's like, look, his men are staking out the airport. You can't get on that plane. And he's like, no, screw it, we're getting on the plane right now.
Mm-hmm, yeah. Yeah, so it's interesting to see his character kind of like have to atone for maybe, like I was saying, short-sighted thinking or something.
Hmm.
This sort of arrogance for sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Um, so yeah, were there any other things that kind of jumped out at you, or anything else you wanted to mention about this movie that we haven't talked about yet?
um, I think we've covered it pretty well. I mean, yeah, it is a pretty simple movie. I'm kind of looking over my notes real quick. Um, Kanjuro Arashi, the actor that plays his victim at the beginning, is a big Yakuza film star that usually plays a bunch of uh, Yakuza bosses and stuff.
Hmm.
He's usually a lot. I'm used to seeing him older than he is in this one, where he's often this kind of aging and dying Yakuza boss who's about to be replaced or something like that.
Hmm.
So it was cool to see him in kind of a little bit of a younger role. But yeah, I think we've basically hit everything that I had to discuss about this movie.
Okay. Yeah. The only thing I would also mention too is, again, going with that Western theme. Like, he says that final battle, it's supposed to take place at a landfill, but it definitely doesn't look like a landfill. It's just like kind of this. But it's very. It did make me. At first, I was thinking, I'm like, why would you arrange to have a gunfight here in this wide open field where there's nothing you can hide behind, no cover whatsoever?
Yeah,
I mean, but it does. It works. It does logically. It doesn't really make a lot of sense, but it works with the tone of the movie they're trying to set up, where they're trying to be evocative of that final showdown in a Western movie.
yeah, and cinematically, it's just like
Mhm.
so striking. Just these like figures standing on just basically a horizon line with like
Right.
nothing around them, like maybe a like telephone pole in the way distance, and there are moments where they're just standing still and firing at each other, and it's
Mhm.
like Was this part of your plan? Like you just assume that they're not going to hit you? But it works. It works off. I mean, he does get hit, but
Yeah.
thankfully not fatally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but yeah, it's an interesting movie. I did have little problems with some of the pacing and some of the characterization, but overall, it's definitely enjoyable, and it's not going to take a lot of your time if you do decide to give it a watch. Like again, it's only 84 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
and honestly, stylistically, it just looks great. You could probably watch it on mute and still enjoy it. Although I wouldn't recommend
Yeah,
that because
for
then you
sure.
miss out on the jazzy spaghetti
The
western type
music.
score. Yeah.
The music is so good. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I highly recommend this movie. I love this movie. It's not like super deep, but I think on kind of it excels on all kind of aesthetic levels and vibes. Good
And when you think
vibes.
about a lot of these, kind of like small, lowish budget. Again, I'm saying low budget. I'm not sure if it actually was, but I think most of Nikkatsu's was like that. It's, you know,
Mhm.
there's a gulf of quality. Like there are some that are just absolutely unwatchable, but then this is definitely one of the better ones, I'd say.
Yeah, it made me think about one of the most famous Nikkatsu directors is Seijun Suzuki, of course,
Hmm.
and often a collaborator with Joe Shishido. And it made me think about like Suzuki's movies often have a pretty like cobbled together plot and are pretty
Hmm.
scrappy in that sense. And I felt like a little bit of that with this, and there's a little bit of surrealism in this, especially in that final showdown. But it feels a little more streamlined than a Suzuki movie, and
Yeah.
I think maybe a little bit easier of a watch. And so it's kind of like, yeah, you could call it kind of a popcorn. It's like a popcorn movie with a French New Wave influence,
Right.
So it's like it's beautiful, but I think it's a fun and easy watch.
Yeah. I mean the point about the his collaborations with Suzuki is a good point because if you're thinking about Suzuki's movies, like they're much more experimental, a little bit more
Hmm.
trippy, I guess you'd say too.
Hmm.
Um, whereas it's very straightforward.
Yeah. No, on Toho Yaro, our podcast, we did Tokyo Drifter, and I had to watch that movie twice. I was hosting that episode, and just to like get a plot summary down, I was just
Mm,
like, this was awesome. I don't know why a lot of the stuff was happening or who was affiliated with what gang, and it isn't like a Battles Without Honor and Humanity thing where it's just lots of key players and you have
mhm.
to kind of keep track of things with a map. It's just honestly like they had a month to make this movie, and they and they had to kind of piece it together best they could. And so
Yeah.
I
Well, also
think in
like
those.
that's part of Suzuki's style too. Because I remember watching Pistol Opera, and I've seen that movie like two
Mhm.
or three times. And if you put a gun to my head, I could not tell you what that movie's about.
Yeah, right, but you can recall like really cool set pieces
Oh,
or
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
scenery. Yeah.
Okay, Joey, thanks so much for coming on. I'm glad we were finally able to get you come on after we had touched base on social media. So,
Hmm.
but why don't you tell people where they can find your work?
Sure. You can find me on Twitter and Blue Sky as Joey Weiser or Joey Weiser Comics on Instagram. Instagram is more professionally focused, so if you just want to see art, you can go there or go to my homepage, tragic-planet.com, which is a portfolio site where you can see examples of my comics and illustration and stuff. And yeah, if anybody listening out there is in the Athens, Georgia area, check out the Athens Flickr Film Society page on Facebook, or come by Flickr, the bar Flickr Theater, which is actually a bar, and you can find out information about that film club.
Okay, great. We'll have links to that stuff in the show notes, so please check that out. As for us, japanonfilm.com is the website. We are Japan on Film on Instagram and Blue Sky. Technically still on Twitter, but I don't like spending a lot of time there, so you're not going to see me over there that much. Um, Also, I have got a comic book that by the time you listen to this should be out. It's called Paragons of Earth. It's a superhero comic where we've taken a bunch of public domain characters and kind of dusted them off, reinvented them. And you can find that at crowdfunder.com/paragonscomic. That's crowdfunder, no E, .com/paragonscomic. We'll also have a link to that in the show notes. Um, And also, we are part of the We Made This podcast network, so please make sure to listen after the credits, hear what's coming up next from some of the other great shows on this network. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. The Japan on Film podcast is produced by me, Perry Constantine, in conjunction with the We Made This podcast network. Visit japanonfilm.com for show notes, episodes, merchandise, and information about being a guest yourself. You can also reach out to me on the website's contact form if you have questions or comments about Japanese movies or the show itself. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at JapanOnFilm. If you'd like to help support the show, you can donate at japanonfilm.com, wemadethisnetwork.com, or by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can find links with information about each guest and join the discussion on the We Made This Discord in the show notes of each episode. And now, listen to hear what's coming up next on the We Made This Network.
Welcome to the third age of podcasting.
The year is 2024.
The name of the podcast is A Dream Given Form.
Join A Dream Given Form in 2024 as we continue our Babylon 5 journey, picking up our exploration of Season 2 and beyond. Check out fortnightly episodes looking back at Season 2 from spring 2024. And be sure to check out our previous Season 1 episodes and wider thematic discussions.
I don't understand what the huge problem is that people have with infection, to be honest. I know it's not great, but it's got a monster in it, and it's quite exciting, and it has David McCallum.
It does.
But, you know, I did have to come up with an answer to the question, and with a heavy heart, I would say that the episode I would skip is Grail, probably because...
You can't cut out David Warner. You can't do that.
Well, no, that...
You can, and he just
Well,
did.
no. Guys.
Including interviews with Pat Torman.
When the animation came around, where I personally speaking for myself, I thought, oh, it's perfect, because we could do so much that we couldn't do with the budget, and the limitations of live action. But with this, and it doesn't matter how old we are.
Marshall Teague.
He said, you make the sword, I'll create the role. And I walked in with the sword. He looked at it and he said, oh yeah.
And Peter Jurusik.
I had great trust that at one point I realized, this guy knows what he knows who Jakar is. And, you become the expert. I mean, that's what we're supposed to do, right? We're supposed to interpret the people and interpret the literature. And as I said, make them walk and talk and be real.
So join us on A Dream Given Form.
Alas,
Best hope
for peace.
Are you a fan of the Marvel Universe?
Can you tell your Kang from your Doctor Doom?
Well, if so, boy, do we have a podcast for you.
Podcast 616 is the We Made This Network's long-running Marvel podcast, and it's under new management.
We're your hosts, Ashley Thomas
and Hugh McStay.
And together, we are going to lead you every step of the way through the Marvel Cinematic Universe's upcoming multiverse saga.
Everything from She-Hulk to Avengers Secret Wars will be covered on the podcast in the kind of detail that would make a Wikipedia article blush.
We're going to have some detours into the wider Marvel world where we'll look at non-MCU projects dating all the way back to Marvel's origins in the groovy, funky 60s, and all the way up to the birth of the greatest franchise in cinema history.
And we'll be joined on our adventure by a roll call of guests so impressively knowledgeable that they'll make the Avengers themselves look clueless by comparison.
So if you like your opinions sharper than Wolverine's claws,
or takes hotter than the Human Torch's underpants,
then get Podcast 616 in your ears as a matter of urgency.
You'll love it 3000.
Podcast 616. Disassemble.